My name is Alan. I am one of the co-founders of Spark Academy, where we do kind of adaptive and experiential learning for the corporate world in the fields of innovation, leadership, agility, creativity. That's me, and I'll let Vincent introduce himself.
Thank you, Alan. So, Vincent, I'm the founder, and I'm leading at the moment a competency centers at Philip Morris International for design thinking and lean enterprise. And we are working very closely with Alan over the last 4 or 5 years for innovation training.
So a couple of agendas, a brief agenda, what we're talking about today. Kind of over the last, I don't know, how long have we known each other, Vincent?
7 years, yeah, that is.
7 years. And both of us have been working in innovation-related things for the last 10, 12 years. We've gotten to know kind of a lot of different types of innovation, let's say, setups within large corporates, as well as what are the metrics that some people follow or should not be following at different levels of the organization, and what we've found that works. So kind of we want to share with you kind of some of those insights. So first off, kind of I wanted to give you an overview of different types of corporate innovation types that we've seen over the years, some of the pros and cons of these ones. And I'm sure there's others, but kind of from a very, very high level. First, what we call the parallel project. Some companies that are running this type of thing is, for example, here in Switzerland, PostFinance. Google has been doing this for many years. And the idea is you draw out a group of people, basically, and you put them to work on specific times, on specific kind of on the side, to work on specific kind of types of topics or projects that you might kind of think are interesting for the organization, either them or others, so kind of a skunkworks type project. This is generally quite, let's say, intensive, and it requires kind of a lot of extra work for the people involved because they're doing this kind of, again, parallel to their job. And another one of the challenges usually is when you have someone who's participating in this and you need to kind of let them go because they're not the right fit. And that usually kind of leads to certain, negativity you can experience. So kind of one very, very high level setup of how we've seen innovation in large corporates. Another one is a specific function. Again, there's a design thinking function or an agility function or lean startup function or whatever other insert buzzword here function you'd like to look at. And what we see here is that this is a specific kind of department within the organization. And companies that have kind of been doing this, actually, Philip Morris has been doing this for quite a while. And the idea here is that you're basically kind of a center of excellence, and you're training as well as kind of taking people on loan, sort of say, to be able to work on projects. So you've got your FTEs, but kind of in terms of execute things, you depend on other FTEs. There's two main challenges here that we see. Number one, this requires obviously a strong kind of buy-in from the upper management to kind of push for middle management to share resources. And when I mean resources, and I call them the A players, I think we've all been in a situation where, okay, I need someone to help me from operations. And you know that Sally in operations is really, really, really good. But Sally is doing 80% of the team's job, right? So don't touch Sally. Sally has to stay here. You can take Bobby. Bobby's over there in the corner. He has nothing to do. You take Bobby. And for these things to really work, you really, really need to find, detect, and kind of get those A players. And that requires kind of top to really, really push for the mid-management to let people go. The other one that we've seen, not so much lately, but we saw it for a while, is kind of this overall organization implementation. Reminded of like the times when, Lean Six Sigma was basically showered all through these kind of manufacturing. And companies like SAP, for example, or Nestle, they really, really went all in saying, okay, we need the entire organization to be kind of an innovative driven organization. This puts in a lot of different kind of frameworks for everybody. It gets everybody kind of educated. You've got a huge kind of transformation program. However, some of these things can become very superficial. And people just start doing these things because, okay, yeah, we're supposed to do a stand-up meeting, so I guess we're no chairs now. So we're standing here. Or we need to fill out an A3 template. Does it make any sense? No, but yes, okay, but that's what they told us we need to fill out every Friday. So these things can become superficial unless they're properly led. The next one, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is the mighty innovation lab, the White Tower. issues, again, this is a really, really interesting setup that we've seen a lot of companies try, some successfully and most of them unsuccessfully. You've got CEO or board who says, okay, we're going to have group of crazy, incredible people sitting in the corner over there. They get the colorful kind of offices and they get to play with Post-its, and we're hiring a lot of really, really talented people. And they're going to come up with new stuff and we're going to try to develop that. The issue that happens here usually is the misalignment between basically what is that crazy, innovative people doing over there versus, okay, I need someone to help me manufacture this. And then whoever's in charge of manufacturing is like, well, yeah, that's not my job. My KPIs are not connected to that at all. So this misalignment between the crazy innovative guys over here and the rest of the organization over there. That's usually kind of the bigger challenges to connect these two things. Companies that have been doing this, for example, Deutsche Telekom has done this a lot. Logitech tried and failed until they went for the approach I mentioned before, kind of being a design-driven organization. So I think there's no one size fits all. There's different ways of approaching this and a lot of lessons learned. SAP, it took them 8 years to figure out what to do with design thinking after their CEO and top board member basically shoved it down everybody else's throat. Again, 8 years, and that's coming out of their own words. So again, it's a lot of prototyping and testing, and organization is kind of a living entity, and I think that's what we need to be mindful of. There's not a silver bullet here. So, okay, just wanted to give you kind of a large overview on different ways we've seen innovation applied in large organizations. Question is, whatever it is we're doing and however it is we're doing it, how do we actually measure it? Because that's what, at the end of the day, people will be very excited to give us a bucket of money and tell us, go innovate. But after a little while, they're going to come back and like, okay, so what have you achieved? Okay, so when are we expected to see, returns on investment, or like times are getting tough? Do we really do this? So, and I think that's key to setting up any of these things that I mentioned before, having a clear governance, having clear KPIs, having clear, okay, how are we going to evaluate this kind of from now and towards the future? And if we have that set from the beginning, then we know what to answer when people ask us for accountability. So I'll let over to Vincent and give you kind of input into this.
Thank you, Alan. So regardless the corporate innovation type you might have implemented within your organization or you are planning, that means you have always the same issue. And I can talk by experience in big organizations, big corporates who are used to run, let's say, like a very stable business model for decades. You are really looking at more incremental innovation than disruptive innovation, which means that your people get used to those traditional financial KPIs and they try to use them as well to measure innovation, having the corporate accounting to measure innovation. And we all know that this is not possible, because that means how can you measure something that has not happened? So that's why when you go to innovation, you need to have specific innovation accounting in place when you want to measure, for example, the healthiness of your product lifecycle framework. So you need to find a different way to measure your innovations. If you go to the next slide, Alan. Now, what is also important is that when you put in place, and Alan will talk about this one at different level, you will see, because you don't measure only the innovation pipeline, you measure as well what is happening around the innovation pipeline, and you will see what Alan will present to you later. That means what is also very important is to be sure that you make a difference between the activity and the impact metric, because you may know that there are two kinds of metrics. Those activity metrics that we measure the level of what's happening, but this is sometimes just impressive. That will give you great numbers, great impression, but at the end, you don't really know what's happened. So you have much more to look at what we call impact actionable metrics, where you can really measure the tangible results of all the innovation related activity you may do at the individual, the team, the context, the company level, because you know what happened and you know what needs to be done to maybe pivot, change what you are doing. So this is also fundamental, that when you put in place those innovation metrics, you need to make this clear distinction between activity and impact metrics. Okay. Now, what is also important to understand is that before we were just talking about the product lifecycle framework, which is like your innovation pipeline, but you shouldn't measure just this one to check about how your innovation performance are. There are much more stuff to be measured at your company to be able to report the performance of your innovation. And this is what Alan will present you just right now.
So, okay. all sounds nice and great, but what actually do we measure? Again, there's not the metric per se, but again, I want you guys to take this as kind of some metrics and an inspiration to see what other things can you measure, again, depending on how you're doing and what type of, let's say, framework you have within the organization. Either way, I think the most important thing to consider is that we need to think about kind of innovation and all these different types of activities at 3 layers. The individual, who is you or me or Vincent or Kate or who is involved, and how he or she is actually developing as an individual, as an employee, as a professional, kind of as a team player. I think this is very, very, very kind of poorly, let's say, done in many organizations these days, but we're seeing really more a push towards how can we help develop people. Then there's the team side. And again, the team is the organizational function that actually is getting stuff done. And this is really, really important. Without a proper team, I mean, nobody, this lone genius doesn't exist, especially within the context of an organization. You're going to need, for anything you want to do, you're going to need someone from accounting, you're going to need someone from operations, you're going to need someone from marketing and sales, you're going to need someone from marketing. You need to put together a group of good people. And again, do these people function well together? Do these people actually kind of complement each other? And finally, is a context. Context has been proven to be the number one parameter that basically helps define or hinder an innovator. If you put the most innovative person in the wrong context for too long, innovation will go down. So let's look at a couple of different things, but overall we need to have this balance between these 3 layers. So individual, and again, these are just very, very kind of it's a example part, but is this person progressing in his or her career? And is this person progressing how he or she wants to progress? Is this a conversation that we're having? Again, there's many, many different ways of tackling this, but yourself as an individual and the manager of whoever's managing these individuals needs to think about, okay, where does this person want to be there and how can I help him or her get there? And as an individual, okay, what am I aiming to achieve in a certain time frame and how can we get there? Career progression is kind of the standard thing that we've been looking at over time, and somehow we started kind of forgetting it in the last 10 years since the financial crisis. Everybody's just happy to have a job, and that's led to a lot of, let's say, unhappiness generally. So we need to think about, okay, what are we trying to achieve professionally here? Second is the skill set. What skills do I need to better do what I'm doing today, and what skills do I need to develop to do what I want to do tomorrow? And how can I actually put an actionable plan onto how do we get there? How do we build those? Do I really understand myself? Do I know my strengths and weaknesses, and can I build on them? Again, this is a personal exercise as much as it is a manager towards their team. And then something that we use a lot actually is how involved is this individual with other basically departments, other units. We use different electronic methods. We use different kind of projects to measure, is this person actually engaged in other things? Is this person generally curious of what's happening in other areas of the organization? When you're working with someone in innovation related field, this person needs to have some level, at least a very, very small level of curiosity of how other functions, other people are doing their work and how they're operating. So we measure very, very clearly how involved they are with other projects, how involved they get into other activities. And for us, this is kind of a very, very key. Vincent, do you want to add anything to this?
No, I think this is clear. I mean, the skill set is fundamental, and you will see this one later when we will talk about the experience at PMI in the real case. This is fundamental as well, to develop the people, to upskill your employees to what they need, what they want, and what the company also needs. Super important.
So if we move over to the team, and here we start seeing a little more kind of, let's say, chunkiness, because again, it is a team. Again, in our modern day work environment, this digital work we live in, everything is basically team-based. A lot of different things we can look at, and Vincent can give us her input, how he's measured this at Philip Morris in a second. But again, we talk a lot about like cost savings and avoidance, and I think this is interesting because, again, especially large organizations, we tend to live on projects that have been along for a long time, and do they still make sense? Does it? How much things that were being done did we manage to realize, okay, We call it the kill rate. Can we actually kill things? And again, a high performance team, a team that's actually kind of effective, will not want to work on something that makes no sense. And this is something we've pushed into the innovation teams we work in. It's like, okay, guys, kill. Do we want to kill this? Do we want to pivot? Do we pull the plug? Do we pivot, or do we persevere? And again, this is a question that every team should be asking themselves continuously. Something we use very frequently is how many experiments are we designing? And we have a very, very clear definition of experiments. Do you have a hypothesis, and what validates or invalidates a hypothesis? And again, we want to focus on data-driven decision-making. And when I mean data, I mean like actual kind of some type of evidence. It doesn't need to be, a million Excel sheets. It means like, do we have any evidence for this to work or not? And if we think in an experimental mindset, then it's easier to make decisions. And decision-making usually is where things always get stalled. Again, some of these are self-explanatory. But for example, going back to the experiments, kind of how much does it cost us to experiment? And again, sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, well, we're going to hire McKinsey to tell us if this actually works, and we'll be back in 3 months. And McKinsey gave us some great insights, but at the end of the day, we just knew that this was a bad idea or a good idea, and that just cost us $500,000. Could have we done this more effectively? And we should constantly be trying to reduce the cost of those experiments by cutting them into smaller pieces and trying to do more faster time. Anything you want to add to this, to these metrics, Vincent?
Yes, I mean, if we look at the cost savings or avoidance, for example, one of the tricks we have in our teams is, for example, when they come and they suggest to pull the plug, so to stop a project, we always propose them, show to the management how much it will have cost to the company to keep doing this, And it helps as well sometimes to take the decision faster, because you will realize the amount of money you can save by stopping doing things that are going nowhere. And if I look at the project churn, for example, we have in some of our affiliates, they have a very high project churn, numbers. They are really forced to stop as much as they can because just a matter of resources, I mean, we don't have elastic budget all the time and resources. So there is a moment where you cannot put your eggs in all the baskets. You have to select the right one as soon as possible to be sure that you are bringing the right value to your customers. So this is definitely numbers. And people were not used to this, I can tell you. And that means when Alan was talking about projects that going forever and forever, that means we all know in corporate that we have those ghost or pet projects that we keep, I would say, moving team from team and expecting that the new team will make the project better than the previous one, where we already know that this project should have been stopped for, I would say, ages. So by having these kind of numbers in place, you force a certain agility and pace to your company and to the innovation pipeline.
Now, organization. And again, this is a bit more academic in nature. And I think I'm quoting a lot of different kind of academic research from my past and from my partner, Stefan, who's a professor at ETH Zurich. But the number one, basically, parameter that measures innovativeness in an organization is persistence, basically. Again, it sounds contradictory to let's have these pet projects running for forever, and that's not the same thing. But do companies continuously invest in innovation? Now, what does innovation look like? I can put you a couple of different bubbles here, and you saw some at the beginning of what I mentioned, different forms of innovation in organization. The question is, do we stick to it? Do we adapt? Do we change? Do we do this differently? I'll give you an example of corporate VC. Allianz, and I worked for Allianz for a while, has had in the last 10 years, I think 4 or 5 different types of corporate VC approach. They've pivoted. They realized they need to keep on investing, but they realized they weren't doing it the right way. And from the outside, it looks like, okay, this looks a little kind of shaky and they're probably not doing a great job. No, they were realizing this doesn't work properly, so let's try it differently. But they kept on going at it. Same thing with learning and development. Are we still investing in our people, R&D, et cetera? Now, a little bit more in detail is like, okay, we can measure what's happening, but we also need to figure out, okay, is there output? Is there some specific outcome that we're looking into? Again, just some examples of things that we should be looking into an outcome. Now, you can look at any public organization and you can look at their, yearly reports, and you will see how much they're spending on these different things and for how long have they been doing so. So sometimes when people tell me like, oh, do you think this company is very innovative? I don't know, but we can check. How they're doing it, that's a different story. And that's kind of going to the first two levels that we talked about before. But again, at least from the start, is this organization, is this context thinking in the future? Are they investing in the future? If the answer is yes, we're investing in some of these things, at least most likely, yes, they are thinking of the future. Have they been doing so for the last 5-10 years? Yes. Okay. These people are actually committed to that. So I think that's something very, very simple to look into our own organization or any other organization we work for. And again, always looking at this, what are we measuring when we're doing this? Because again, a lot of companies that have corporate venture capital just because it's fun. But is there any deal flow? Are they actually, it's a couple of people with a fancy title, but are they actually investing anything? Do they even have a budget? If the answer is no, then probably not. Now, I'll let Vincent give you kind of a bit of an example of how they've tackled this at Philip Morris. Again, we can go into details during the questions.
Well, thank you, Alan. So in a nutshell, that means a few years ago, you may know that Philip Morris took this radical, let's say, decision to get out of cigarettes and to design a smoke-free future, which means that to launch a new set of products that may help people who cannot quit smoking to better alternatives. But that means launching those kind of new products also require a new way of working, of new way of thinking, because we were putting us back in the shoes of like startups, because launching new products. So we were looking at putting in place much more, let's say, innovative, agile team to work on this project in the headquarters, but also in the market to be able to engage with the consumers. And what we realize is that if we require this new way of working, yes, we can provide the basic to our people for those new way of working around design thinking, lean startup, agile, you name them. But we also need to anchor this deeply and having, I will say, really community of people that can anchor this new way of working across all the organization, across all the market, across all the function. And this is how, with Alan, we developed this certification program over the last 4 years that is called the Fast Forward Certification for Catalyst. And we have been able over the different years to train more than 200 people. You may see in the numbers, if you look at the 2021, that yes, we have trained more than 200 people, but only 140 has been certified. You may say, oh, strange. No, it's not strange. It's just the fact that with, for example, this training we have put in place, we have been very selective in a sense that we are looking for quality and not quantity, because we need to have really, I will say, a deep involvement of those people into the project. They need to master the topic, and they need really to provide an added value to the business in what they are doing, supporting those agile teams across the world, which means that, for example, even if we welcome a lot of people in the training, at the end, we have been able to select a few of them and to qualify a few of them based on what were their results through the certification. What you may see as well in the map is that you see that we have lots of people around the world, because at the end, that means our markets are facing the consumer directly. So they are in direct actions with them, so they can immediately collect feedback and know what's happening. But so far, so good. I mean, this is a program that we have built over the last 4 years. And what was interesting is that we really built it over experimenting. I mean, we were more or less doing what we were preaching when we were measuring as well the progress of our programs, applying those kind of metrics, which are really telling you what's happening. For example, do those people have a real impact in the markets where they have been trained, where have they been allocated, or are they just, I will say, selling innovation for the purpose of selling innovation without having a clear impact on the business and day-to-day activities? So this is a program that we put in place. Yep. Next slide. So now, does it work? Either you trust me, okay? Or maybe you look at some numbers. And if we look at PMI, we have collected different kind of feedback, because as you may guess, our management is always, asking us, does it work? And especially when you touch changing the way of thinking, the way of working, because you are really changing, I will say, people. And you know how difficult it might be to change people, because there is a lot of resistance. Imagine that when you are running for decades the same business model around the same product, I'll let you imagine the kind of habits that might have been developed in the company. So what we have done is we measure at a different level the results of all this innovation training we provide to our employee. First of all, by looking at quantitative numbers. So for example, this is just example to share with you, but we have more than 40 examples of projects where either we increased the revenue very quickly in a market, or we did some cost savings, or even efficiency in terms of days, for example. So we have a lot of examples around this one. We also collected lots of qualitative data by questioning, interviewing people. And sometimes we even use an extra company to run those interviews with our employee in the market to be sure that they were not biased or we were not influencing the response that they were giving us. And as you may see, that means the results are quite spectacular. And the program today is well spread, well deployed in the company. And I can tell you, even we are sometimes having more candidates than the slots we may support for this program. So the quality is there. It has been measured, and we have really impact on the business with these programs.
So again, before I let you ask questions, you probably have a few. I think we're almost on time. Again, just in very, very short, you can't do one without the other. No matter what your role is, again, you have to think about yourself, you think about your team, you need to think about the context. And again, I tell this to my students, I tell it to people all the time, if you're not in the right context, you either change the context or you move. Again, it's also not great to be in an unhealthy relationship, right? So if it's not the right context, get out of there, find one that actually kind of supports your innovativeness. If you are in the right context and you think you can make that change, then kind of start thinking of how can you actually invest in your team and in yourself. And I think that's kind of key. We need to balance these three things. We can't have one without the other. And unfortunately, many times we only think from top down or bottom up, and this requires kind of going both sides. Vincent, anything on your side?
Yeah, this is what make, I would say, our program a success within the company, is that from the beginning, we have been able to tackle both sides, to say, yes, we got the sponsor from, for example, the members of our senior management to make this transformation happening. But very quickly, we have been able as well to approach the bottom up for the people to realize what's in it for me. You know, why should I change? Why might be my benefit? Why this is something I need to do? And by doing those top approaches, you have been able, and we have been able over years to really anchor these changes. You know, it's not like those traditional top-down approach, which are like just spread among the corporate organization and everyone is looking at each others and wondering, why should I change? What's happening? What's in it for me? So you need to have both if you want to anchor those changes, because again, when you are looking at changing the way of thinking, the way of working, having people more innovative, more agile, you change way of working, which means that you might have a huge resistance. So you need to demonstrate what's in it for them, and also to demonstrate to your management quick wins. For example, we're talking about cost avoidance, cost savings. Most of the time, this is quick wins. When you can stop stuff which are not provided any value, neither for your consumer, neither for your customer, neither for the business, then you can say, you know, guys, we spent 3 months. We kill all this amount of project we were running for years for nothing. And we save this amount of money to do no stuff that makes really sense for the company. That's already a good sign, I would say, that you are moving toward the right direction.
Which requires a team that's willing to take the risk of killing something, of failing.
Exactly.
Which again, that develops of having the right team and having the right people in the team who feel confident enough and have that self-efficacy. So we'll stop right there, guys, and we'll answer any questions. Simon, I'll let you take charge.
Take charge. So perfect. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Vincent, for sharing. There's a few things in the chat, and people have also shared some interesting talks for anyone that hasn't seen the thread. So I've got a couple of direct messages for questions as well. So let me kick us off with one of them. So one of the questions is, what are good examples of innovation L&D? I think you kind of touched on that, Vincent, although maybe you could add a bit more detail into some of the things that you actually were doing in your Catalyst training, and also what does that level of investment look like, and who is it for? I know you said you trained a number of your Catalysts, but how do you select them? Like, how do you invite people to get in? There's quite a lot of questions in there, but pick them off and I can repeat them if you missed any.
No problem. Alan, I take this one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So for the Catalyst, that means, first of all, we have developed as well with Alan a very strong profile assessment, which means that we only accept in this training people who are matching the profile we need. Because if you want to play the Catalyst role within, I would say, market and functions, you need to demonstrate not only hard skills, but also soft skills, okay? Because you will have to deal sometimes with uncertainties. You will have to deal with, sorry to tell you this, but ego of some people. You will have to even, I would say, demonstrate negotiation skill as well among your project, and also your capability to support the team in very tough times. Okay. So the profile assessment is like, I would say, a pre-funneling to the certification programs where we, let's say, let go the persons who have the best profile to play this role. And in our company, this is a role which have been designed as a job description. So it's not something that you do on top of your, duty or 100% time. And it's not a nice to have job. So most of the markets, they have a series of catalysts certified, and this is their job on a daily basis to support the different project team and innovation team they may have locally. So yes, we have profile assessments, and we have also strong assessment along the certification. And that's why, as you might have seen with some numbers, not everyone starting is succeeding at the end, because they might have the right profile, but at the end, they may still fail during the education program.
Very good. And can you give a little bit more flavor as to the types of things that you're doing in your certification?
Alan, you want to explain this one, maybe?
Yeah. So we divided the certification into 3 layers. We call it kind of the core, the advanced, and the master level. And the idea is that the core level is, remember Lean Six Sigma back in the day, the yellow belt? Essentially, the idea is here, you have everybody understand the core lingo, the core vocabulary. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? What's the mindset we're looking for, et cetera? And these are the people who are actually going to work on projects. These are your worker bees, let's say. Then you have the advanced level, which the idea here is these are people who can run a project, who can be project leads. And finally, we have a master level. These people who can think for a portfolio. The content we see at the very beginning, at the core level, is very kind of entry level customer discovery. Can these people lead interviews? Can these people kind of think in different ways of collect customer basically insights? Number 2, can they come up? How do they come up with ideas as a team and select? Decision making is key. Number 3, can they design an experiment and test things? Can they actually collect data to clear those experiments? And finally, we have agile team dynamics. This is, for example, one of the modules where everybody feels like, oh yeah, we don't need this. We've done this before. Nobody thinks that they're a terrible team member. Most of us are actually. But when you're working in a high performance team, when you're working in an innovation related project, you really need to kind of have a very, very good trust with your team and a good dynamics. So we're really trying to push this. So this is kind of the core elements. Moving forward, we have different things like user experience, business models, negotiation, communication. So different, again, of these behavioral, soft skills, which, as Vincent mentioned, are super important.
What is the time frame that you're doing this over then, Alan? Just out of interest.
So the core part, the entry level, let's say the yellow belt or the core curriculum is about 3 months. And they're spending about 8 hours a week, basically. So the idea is, was that correct, Vincent?
Yeah, correct.
6 to 8 hours a week.
Right.
Over 3 months, basically. Whoever were to do the whole thing, and then they have to do actual projects, and we evaluate those projects. The whole thing is very practical. It's not just about looking at videos and clicking multiple choice questions. They have to actually apply these things. So the whole program done end to end in one go would be about 14 months. And again, the idea is that they're actually working on real projects that are for value for the business. So it's not just something I did on the side and then I have nothing to do with my day-to-day work.
I think the big change for our employees when we launched this program like 4 years ago already, and we went through multiple experimentation to make it as solid and robust as it is today, and we keep evolving it. I think the big change for them was to go through a programs where, this is not the traditional corporate training where, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you click next, and at the end you have a nice paper to decorate your toilets, So you really have to work and you may fail. So for example, the first wave that was playing with us, the first experimentation, we call them the guinea pigs, of course, they were surprised to fail a lot. And we told them, but this is normal because you are not used, to go to those kind of training where you are asked also to build some stuff because you have to demonstrate by building stuff that you are getting the learning, And we want to be sure because again, remember I was talking about qualitative versus quantity. We want qualitative people. We want the quality of those people. We want to be sure that if I give you a catalyst on your project, you can more or less work with them, closing your eyes. And it's not like we have an army of catalysts, but 90% of them, I shouldn't recommend them. No. You can pick up the one you want. The quality is there,
Very good, very good. Thank you guys. That's really helpful. Rob had a question, so I'm going to invite Rob to come off mic and ask his question.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you, guys. This is really helpful. This is probably my favorite one that I've attended so far from Innov8rs. So really, thank you. I'm pretty much in this like exact world every day, doing L&D, trying to be very specific, retrain our healthcare workforce to get away from placing essential medical equipment orders through fax machine to a digital platform. You would think it'd be simple. It is not. And so we have the stubborn things, but I think one of the things that Vincent really highlighted was, how do we, put our value proposition up against the measured data? How do we highlight these efficiencies, the optimization and all of this? But one thing that we deal with is, there's hospitals that are measuring, they have, a huge staff and they're always really scrutinizing the numbers. But then we have this, small to medium business space that isn't always necessarily like evaluating. And where do you guys go when you're struggling to find, the data in that kind of sense to start building your case a little stronger when it might be more elusive? Because at the enterprise level, super easy to find a lot of that stuff. But as I've noticed on the smaller levels, it's hard to, tell a 2-3 doctor office like, hey, I'm going to double your efficiency when they don't know what their efficiency is in the first place, or lack thereof, I guess.
Yeah, I think, Alan, please go.
No. Look, I think there's two different elements here, Rob, that I think are important to say. One is the data that you need to show, but honestly, sometimes, again, we're seeing it more and more these days with kind of the polarization in politics, and data sometimes is not going to cut it, period. So you can tell the 3 doctors in the office, you're going to be rich by tomorrow, and they'll still be like, yeah, we like our fax machine, and moving on, right?
My day to day.
Exactly. There's this, and this has nothing to do with L&D in itself, but there's this metaphor of the rider and the elephant, and kind of the rider is the conscious part of, like, that's where the data should make sense, but the elephant is kind of our gut feeling and our kind of comfort and like what we've kind of honed over time. And we think that the rider is actually controlling the elephant, but the elephant is this mammoth of a thing which kind of actually steers the way. There's a book called Switch by Cheap Heath. I don't know if you've read it. And it shows a bit more the startup-y, more businessy version of this. There's a lot more like basically psychology behind this. But I think something that's clear is, yes, we can have this hard data, but we also need to be able to move their hearts and souls at the same time.
Yeah.
And that requires a little bit of a different type of convincing, where you need to make it kind of clear. I think one of the examples in the book, if I'm not going too deep into this, stop me, but essentially someone was trying to show how wasteful they were being in their procurement process by basically everybody was just buying whatever gloves they needed for the manufacturing. And this guy literally went around and collected one sample of every glove that was being bought for different providers. And then he tagged them and put them all in one room on the table, and then invited senior management to come in and said, look, this is all the different types of suppliers and all the different types of gloves that we're buying for this one factory. And every single tag, there was a price and the type of glove. So that's a visceral type of like, okay. He could have come with an Excel sheet and said, look, we're spending this much and we're wasting X amount of money, and we could just go with one supplier, and that would not have dragged people so emotionally as the gloves on the table. So sorry to go deeper to that, but you need to be able to balance both these things.
I really like that, because I think what I need to start doing is like showing people the stack of paper, right? Like this is how much paperwork we had last year. We got to cut it down to here. Thank you. That was great.
Exactly.
It's really to create this emotional moment, if I can say like, absolutely.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good. There was another question from Tanushree. I saw Alan had posted something in there, but Tanushree, I don't know if you want to elaborate on your question any further and come off microphone, or Alan, if you want to add anything more to that. Tanushree, if you're there and you want to speak, feel free to.
Sure. So thank you for calling me out. Hi, everyone. So I'm in the L&D space, and one of the things that we are always trying to do is how do we internalize this mindset, because it's also about really enabling people to have this mindset in their everyday ways of working, and not just exclusively on a specific project. so to speak.
Exactly.
And in that sense, and what you mentioned about taking a learn by doing approach and not just going with, just standalone training, which people love and then they easily forget, but to actually see that, hey, let's work with a real challenge and see how do we actually embrace the concepts. And yet, something that's still not clear for me is that, yes, we give them a real life challenge. They work through that challenge. How do we sort of track, or how do we measure that this is truly embedded and it's truly making a change in their ways of working in their specific roles or teams? So that's something I'm still trying to understand.
Okay, maybe I can start responding on this. I mean,
go ahead.
Based on the experience I had over the last years at PMI and deploying this customer centricity, experimentation, data-driven mindset, I think, first of all, I used to say that you need always to start with your early adopters, okay? So which means that if you try to convince everyone that this is the right way to do, it's like giving water to someone who is not thirsty. So which means that you need to find a place where you know that, for example, in our case, we found 1 or 2 markets where they know that they have nothing to lose because they were not working well. They were failing, product was not working, they were not engaging with the consumers. So we were more or less using them as the guinea pigs, the early adopters, because we told them, you know that you have a problem, you are already looking for a solution, we might be this solution, okay? Changing the way of working in your organization, in your function. So by doing this one, first of all, they understand that they have nothing to lose because the situation cannot be worse than today. We are not progressing, so let's try. So we did it together, and this is what created more or less the movement and the buy-in from the bottom up in our company. Because as you may guess, when you start having quick wins with those people, they quickly talk to each other across the function, across the market, across the region. And for example, suddenly something that started in one market become like a regional activity, went up to the president of the region, that share with the other region, and from bottom up, it become like a top-down tsunami, okay? So starting with your early adopters is really a nice way to do it. Now, you have also a way, I don't want to say to force this, but for example, when your management starts changing the way they measure, for example, the performance of your team, that may also trigger some changes in the way of working. I give you a simple example. If you stop measuring what you were selling yesterday, but you start measuring, for example, what is the cost of converting people from A to B, and people realize that, everything that I will get, like my bonus, will be measured on this, oh my God, I have to change my way of working because otherwise I will not get my nice bonus as I used to have, So there is a way as well by changing, for example, the KPIs at your top, that it may also trigger this change, for the people who might be a little bit reluctant, if you look at the curve of adoption from early adopter to early majority, and, it may help. Then also what we have put in place is like, for example, today, most of the markets, they take their strategy, they derive those strategy into challenges. And I saw a question which was about how do you derive your strategy goal into actionable metrics? I mean, this is what we are doing. You take your strategy in your markets, you derive those one into local challenges, but each challenges have to document as well what are the expected outcomes, which means that if we tackle this challenge in a proper way, what do we expect to see changing in my function, in my market? And changing means outcomes. And how do I measure those outcomes through actionable metrics, progress, success metrics? So this is a long conversation we have in the market, in the affiliate. But when they are able to make this, then you have all this flow going. And this is a way for you to measure that, for example, what you are doing is connected to the strategy and that all the change of the mindset that you are putting in place is getting stuck or anchored in the market or in the function. So there are multiple ways of doing it. But again, let's be frank and honest. If you start with a big program and you say, guys, you have no other way, you need to change everything everywhere, you can already stop. It will go straight forward to the wall because people don't get it. They don't understand, So you really have to start with your early adopter and more or less create the word of mouth. I can tell you, we started, my team, we were 3 when we started. Now we have more than 4,000 people across the market and function doing what I'm telling you today, okay? which means that we started small, but then we got the attraction and like, phew. Because when they saw that there were value and quick wins, they say, why not try? Because why not trying? If this market was able to do it, why not us?
Absolutely. And I think that approach really works. And in addition, the fact that once you have those early adopters, getting them to really have skin in the game, maybe co-invest, also sort of really gets the credibility up. So thank you for sharing your perspective.
And that's also why, for example, today, the certification program we have developed and put in place with Alan is such a success because people see that it works. So people are knocking at the door and say, I want to go through this one as well to help locally.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that you mentioned now is that it's great to have these ambassadors, but if the ambassadors do not have the same vocabulary, they don't have the same mindset, they don't have the same tools, it's really hard to get 5 people who don't speak the same language work together in a room. And yes, we all might speak English, but I'm not talking about that language. I'm talking about, I've done this exercise where I put 5-6 executives in a room and I tell them to write on a Post-it an example of an MVP. And then to try to cluster this. I can tell you everybody will have a definition of what is an MVP. And starting from there forward, it's really, really hard because we are all used to our own different sides, but we need to work together. So I think that's key. We need to align these people and get all these change makers to meet in one place and then realize, hey, I have all these other people to build on. And I think that starts to change.
Exactly. So as we know, time flies when we're having fun, and we're pretty much at time. So I think what I would like to say, first of all, thank you to everyone that joined the session. Thank you for some good questions. Thank you for some good feedback as well. But in particular, thank you to Alan and Vincent for a really interesting session. As all of you know, you can continue to share your insights from this session in the community platform, and there's plenty of other great content in there. The link is now in the chat for the next session after this one. And stay well, everybody. Thank you very much. And thanks again, speakers. It's really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon, Kate, Vincent. Thank you very much.